Morning in the city arrived without ceremony, a pale wash of light slipping between towers like water through a grate. The building at the northeast corner of the avenue appeared to drink that light, to hold it along its plains of glass and steel. It was a place where doors hushed open, where shoes touched stone without squeaking, where money seemed to move without sound. Inside, beneath a lobby whose marble floor mirrored the sky, a woman in a navy uniform guided a cleaning cart, as if she were apologizing to the floor for troubling it. Her name, pressed in small letters on a nicked plastic badge, read Maeve Holloway. She was 52, tall in a way that made her look composed, and thin in a way that made the uniform seem too broad. The hands with which she wrung out cloths and steadied waste bins were steady hands, the sort of hands that might have once buttoned a child's coat, or pressed a fevered forehead, and known, by touch alone, whether to wait or wake a doctor. Maeve's day had a rhythm. She arrived before 6. She cleaned in curves and lines, in the long, uncomplaining patience of water. She spoke little. She did not startle easily. People passed her, a river of decisions and devices, and most of them did not notice that she had eyes kind enough to slow one's heart if one let them. On the 20th floor, Thomas Whitaker, founder and chief of Whitaker Labs, closed a laptop so hard the screen shuddered and his own reflection fractured for a blink into 4 separate men. He had been a swift man once, quick to measure, to cut, to act. Lately he moved as if he had to lift himself through air that refused to bear his weight. He had been reading reports, the kind of reports people called expert assessments, statements bound in polite grammar that still managed to bruise. Severe withdrawal, persistent refusal of touch, regression, inpatient care advised. The subject was his daughter, Grace, 6 years old, a child whose laughter had once rung like a spoon tapped against the lip of a glass. 2 months earlier, Grace's mother had died. The fact traveled through the building the way cold will slip under a door. It was not shouted. It simply arrived and stayed. The child had drawn inward, as if she had been born with gills and someone had taken away the water. Nannies had come and gone. One had left on the 3rd night after finding herself locked outside the apartment in a hallway that smelled faintly of lemon polish and alarm. Therapists had tried, and at least one had wept alone in an elevator after the session and then resigned by email. Thomas tried to feed his daughter, and she would take a bite and set the fork down as if it had suddenly grown heavy. He took her to the office because school, in its careful language, had asked him not to bring her back until she could bear it. He gave her a room near his own, its shelves lined with books, its rug soft under bare feet, a camera unobtrusively fixed in one corner because he was afraid of what? He did not say even to himself. Grace walked the corridor with headphones on and her gaze on the seam where the wall met the floor. The building made room for her. The way a river will bend around a stone it means to carry one day, but cannot carry yet. No one remembers exactly when the cry began. It was a thread of sound, the thin kind grieving children make when they've passed through screaming, and the body has given up that wildness, the sound you could mistake for a pipe in winter, until you felt it land in your own chest. Maeve heard it from behind the far column, the one near the cafe where the light fell differently at 3 in the afternoon. She set down her mop, wiped her hands on her apron without realizing it, and walked toward the sound. Grace sat there with her knees hugged close, her socks grayed at the heels, her small back making a tent under a sweatshirt that had once been pink. Her hair had been brushed in the morning and had come undone again, the way the day comes undone despite best efforts. Maeve did not ask a question. She did not say, "Sweetheart," or it's all right. She lowered herself beside the child until her knees protested and folded, as if her bones remembered prayers. From the pocket of her apron, she drew a small bear sewn from uneven pieces of cloth, its left ear slightly lower than the right, the stitches visible and honest. She placed it between them. Then she leaned back and gave the bear time to belong to the floor. Grace lifted her face just enough for the eyes to show a gray that might go blue on a good day, then reached. The moment she drew the bear into her arms, the cry stopped, not like a door slamming, but like a candle's flame going calm when the door is closed. They sat a while. The lobby continued with its errands. The marble continued with its shine. If anyone glanced over, they would have seen only a woman in uniform resting her knees and a child with a toy, which is to say, the most ordinary miracle in the world. The following morning, Grace walked with the steadiness of someone on a ship who has learned to trust the deck's tilt. She carried the bear like a secret. When Thomas, adjusting his tie, asked where it had come from, she put her face briefly into its mismatched ears and did not answer. He saw it later, too, on the screen, because fear makes cowards of us, and cowards install cameras. He watched in his office as his child slipped down a stairwell and into the lobby and walked, not toward the cafe counter or the revolving door, but toward the corner where the light fell with that particular softness. Maeve wiped a table until whatever memory had stained it lifted. She sat on the floor. From her apron, she took not a toy now, but a bottle cap. She set it on her palm, and with the broom handle, nudged it along the marble. Her voice, when it came, was low and even, a voice for late trains and early mornings. Once, she said, as if telling it to herself, there was a cap that wanted to be a star. People spoke to it as if it were a joke. It did not mind. It learned to catch light the way a lake does. Grace listened, as if the words were a kind of bread. The next day, there was a spoon in the tale, and the day after a leaf that had blown in through the revolving door, each thing promoted to meaning by the attention given it. The cafe manager, Mr. Lem, shorter than he wished and sharper than he needed to be, began to leave a mug of warm milk for Grace at 3. The surface dusted with cinnamon because Mr. Lem had a granddaughter in Queens who sipped it that way, and none of his customers would ever let him make it for them. Thomas watched, and something inside him loosened with relief and tightened with jealousy in the same breath. There was a sentence the therapist had said in a kind voice that made him want to throw a chair. Children heal when they feel seen. He had seen his daughter the whole time, hadn't he? Or had he only looked at her? There is a difference, and it had embarrassed him to discover it. That evening, when Grace said, "The cleaning lady tells the good stories," Thomas countered with, "Do you like her?" Grace paused, then nodded. "She doesn't speak to me like I'm broken." The sentence slid under his skin and lay there like glass. Maeve's apartment did not have much to recommend it, except a window that knew what light to keep and what light to let go, and a closet floor where a wooden box lived beneath a fold of old towels. On nights when the kind of quiet arrives that unsettles one's balance, Maeve took the box out and opened it. Inside were scraps of cotton, arranged by no obvious logic, 3 bears in various stages of almost finished, a handful of letters the color of strong tea, and a photograph of a boy with a gap where his front tooth had been, his arms around a woman whose hair was darker than. His name had been Jonah. He had loved to make houses from sticks and bridges from popsicle sticks and fall asleep under stories. Fire had taken him, not with cruelty. Cruelty requires a mind, but with the blind appetite of a thing that only knows how to go forward. People later said faulty wiring, as if words could make it make sense. Maeve had stopped talking afterward, at least in the way people mean when they say talk. She had stopped teaching. She had been good at it. She could make a shy child recite a poem by letting the quiet be long enough to grow courage. She stopped choosing clothes for color. She learned to be passable at jobs that asked her not to speak, and praised her for not taking up a chair people with degrees might need. But grief has a habit of sending out small messengers. A child crying behind a column. A bear stitched badly enough to be honest. The way a bottle cap gleams on marble. On a wet Thursday, the city seemed to exhale a cold breath through the lobby. The glass wore a film of weather. Grace came early. She stood waiting until Maeve looked up, then asked, with the kind of bravery that deserves a drum roll, "Is today a story day?" Maeve nodded. "It is." She told of an old train forgotten in a yard, its paint blanched, its wheels stubborn, until a girl who had been told she was too small brought oil in a jar, and learning in her hands, and patience in her spine. The train rattled awake, and in time, pulled the weight of people who carried losses in their pockets. It ran best, Maeve said, when its cars were full of passengers who knew how to sit with one another in silence. Grace did not smile. She whispered, "Do you have children?" The cloth in Maeve's hand paused in midair. She could hear, as if someone had put a seashell to her ear, the sound of Jonah's breath when he was pretending to sleep and waiting for a voice to begin. "I had a son," she said. "He liked to build things that looked like nothing to anyone else until they were finished." "Do you miss him?" Grace asked. "There are kinds of missing that do not end," Maeve said. "You carry them the way you learn to carry a bowl without spilling. You get better, but the bowl is always full." Grace put her small hand on Maeve's own. The gesture was not grand, but some gestures save lives the way locks save bridges. Upstairs, Thomas stood at his office window watching the rain sew faint stitches down the glass, and felt the jolt dear to those who love both numbers and people. The realization that a variable he had not considered governed the whole equation. Thomas asked to see Maeve. He did not know how to say thank you without sounding as if he were tipping a waiter too heavily. She entered his office with her hands at her sides, controlled and calm. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, though he had already looked. 7 months and some days, she replied. "My daughter trusts you." Maeve did not lower her gaze. "I am not trying to fix her." He had no answer ready. It was, he recognized, the one he needed. That night, Grace said, "May she tell the bedtime story?" "Not here. Downstairs, where the floor is cold." Thomas's instinct formed by liability training and a father's fear said no. Her eyes said please. He chose the second. They sat near the cafe, the building's day run down to a hum, the coffee machines wiped, the lights softer. Maeve told of a turtle that learned to cross an ocean by believing the moon would hold the tide just long enough for her to rest on rocks no one else used. Thomas stood a little apart, his hands empty, and experienced the clean, sharp ache of joy arriving from a direction one does not control. A man like Thomas acquires a habit of checking. It is not suspicion. It is a way of taking care. He asked for more about Maeve and received less than one might hope. A name, a date, a former address in Newark, a social security number that had smudged in some file room. A favor, quietly called in, placed a thin envelope on his desk. Maeve Holloway, former public school teacher, final year of service, 1999, residential fire, one child deceased, mother survived, No further employment for 2 decades. Reappears on payrolls of cleaning contractors. He read the words steadily and then, without intending to, put his palm over them as if to warm them. To ask a company to make room for something it cannot bill is to invite a lecture. The lecture arrived, as such things do, in emails with subjects like concerning precedent and internal compliance. A senior investor, Mr. Vale, would have preferred to be anywhere else than in a room with a man who had made him a great deal of money and was now asking him to trust what could not be graphed. You are, pardon the plainness, staking your reputation on a janitor. Thomas did not inquire whether Mr. Vale had ever tried to keep a child alive through winter. He said only, "I am rebuilding a thing this place lost." And when Mr. Vale inquired which, Thomas said, "A memory of why we are here." He called a meeting. He asked Maeve to come. The table gleamed. The coffee went cold in cups because everyone was trying not to drink first. He told the room what he had seen. A child that would not be coaxed out of silence by people paid handsomely to speak, and would sit up for a woman who told stories to a spoon. He held the thin envelope in the air without opening it. "She used to teach," he said. "She lost a boy, and with him, a part of herself. She has that part again now, and so does my child." Someone at the far end, cool in a way that had been trained into him, said a word about liability. Maeve, still standing because she had not been asked to sit, said, "I am not here for pity. I am here if it is honest. If it is not, I have work to do somewhere else." Thomas heard in that voice the edge he believed in. "You do not work for the cleaning contractor anymore," he said. "If you'll have it, I'll give you what you already carry. A role whose title we will invent later, and a room where children may sit and not be hurried." It would be sweeter to pretend that everyone greeted that with applause. The building changed first in glances. The elevator learned to carry new kinds of silence. The cafe learned to serve small cups of warm milk without charging. The security desk learned Maeve's name. HR learned how to draft a description for a job no one had yet had. Coordinator for Emotional Development. A title that fit like a borrowed coat and would, in time, be altered to the body that wore it. Maeve asked for terms that were not the usual kind. To keep her apron. To keep the right to say no to any child who wished for a story that did not belong to them. To be paid enough to stop counting bus fares. To be allowed to leave the door open when a child sat alone with her and the building went quiet. Thomas agreed. He had found, this late in a loud life, that consent is a better foundation for anything than charisma. It is in stairwells that decisions find their shape. Concrete, handrails, a sigh of dust that nobody sweeps because nobody notices. Maeve wiped the rail with her cloth because it was her habit, and because she still cleaned when she was troubled. Cleaning gave the hands something to do when the mind needed gentleness. Thomas came down 2 flights too fast, his phone in his hand, and a message on it from legal that sounded like a threat you pay for. "They are pushing back," he said, more winded than he cared to be. "I expected that," Maeve answered. "They want me to let you go." "Then let me go." "I don't want to." "I do not want what you do not want to keep," she replied. "I want peace. When I tell Grace a story, sometimes it feels like my boy is listening beyond the door. I do not need a platform. I need a chair and the time to sit." He had no argument for that. He had only the truth. "I don't know how to fight them all." "Then don't fight for me," she said. "Fight for her." Steps, then small ones. Grace stood on the landing with the bear in the crook of her arm. Are you sending her away? It was not a dramatic voice. It was a voice a child uses when losing has become a habit. Thomas's face did a thing he would not want on a camera. No, he said. Not if I can help it. Not if I have to sell this building stone by stone. Maeve touched the child's sleeve. It is not your fault, little mouse. She is the only one who listens in the right way, Grace said, holding on not to call the woman back, but to keep time from moving too fast. One evening, the apartment was all edges. The sitter, a gentle girl with a braid and a ring that turned her finger green, had stepped into the kitchen to rinse a cup. When she came back, Grace was gone. The camera's lens, which had never failed Thomas yet, failed then. Calling police makes a man feel naked. He did it anyway. He called security and neighbors and people who owed him favors and people to whom he owed things he could not name. He said his child's name with a clarity that made the room stand still. He added the description. 6, thin, sweatshirt gray, bare with uneven ears, a look on her face he could not describe without breaking. His phone buzzed. A message. She is with me. She came to find me. The old building. The old building. The first address Whitaker Labs had called home. It was empty now, the windows dusty, the elevator stubborn. He ran upstairs that wobbled when you doubted them. On the second floor, in a room with nothing left but the outline where desks had once been, sat Maeve and Grace. The child's face was blotched from crying. Her breath was even. The bear sat on her lap like a captain at the helm of a very small ship. I thought, she said before he could ask, you were going to send her away again. I don't like to wait for leaving. She found the way herself, Maeve said softly. I only sat down so she would know where to stop. That night, Thomas wrote a letter and did not edit it. The Jonah Project, he called it, after the boy. With Maeve's consent asked and granted. It would be a place for stories and for the kind of quiet that heals more than noise can. An internal program, not a charity, no fanfare, no tax advantages calculated into its bones. He sent it to everyone whose signature could make or break a thing in that building. He slept on the couch in his little office with his coat for a blanket, and did not dream because the day had used up every dream. The room opened in light that no one corrected. The carpet did not show stains because children should not be made to care about carpet. Shelves held books that had not won awards and books that had, and baskets of cloth and blocks that fit together only by imagination's law. From the ceiling hung a mobile fashioned from wire and paper in the colors of winters and springs long past. The sign by the door read JONAHPROJECT in letters a painter had traced with his slowest hand. Beneath, where stories are heard and hearts are set down to rest, children came the way birds come to a feeder someone kept full through January. They were children of the staff and children of vendors, and a child whose grandmother folded laundry on the 12th floor, and a child who had come to fix a printer, and, hearing a voice, sat down and forgot to be 19. They drew and told and sat and sometimes simply inhaled. Maeve moved among them without hurry. She did not collect their secrets. She returned them, polished. Grace fetched cups and taped drawings to the wall and became, to her own surprise, excellent at being the first to laugh. Thomas stood in the doorway, the way a man will stand in a church when he has told himself for years that he is too clever for churches, and then finds one that smells of dust and wax and childhood. Do you think you will teach again? He asked Maeve after a Thursday afternoon, when the light had the color of butter. I never stopped, she said. I forgot for a while how. The Jonah Project did not become an advertisement. It became a rumor that some people with suits wished to make disappear and could not, because too many people who were not wearing suits had begun to carry it around in their pockets like a charm. Invitations came. Maeve declined them, one by one, with gratitude and suspicion, until the invitation for the 1-year mark arrived, and she said yes, because anniversaries matter to the dead and the living. The auditorium filled with the usual mix of people who believed in numbers, and people who believed in people, and people who believed in both. Maeve walked to the lectern and placed one hand on it to keep the tremble from becoming a spectacle. For years, she said, I lived in the thin place beyond words. I cleaned rooms no one remembered entering. I carried a grief you could not see. One day a little girl sat beside me and asked for a story. She returned my voice to me as if it had been left on a bench and she had found it. She let the silence be long enough to teach those in the room who had never been loved by silence before that it is a kind of care. If you know a person who folds themselves into corners, she said, please sit on the floor beside them before you invite them to stand. It is not always kindness to pull a person up. The room stood, not because they were told to, but because the body knows sometimes what to do before the mind receives its orders. In the front row, Grace leaned into her father. She's not only my friend, she whispered. What is she? He asked. She's the keeper of the small light. He did not cry, he did later, alone in an elevator that stalled at the 6th floor long enough for a man to remember he had a heart. Thomas had built rooms with budgets and sealed them with signatures. He learned here to stand back, to count with different measures, to say not now to his own urge to mend a thing before it had finished breaking in the way it needed to break in order to be remade correctly. He learned to braid a little girl's hair bummily and then better. He learned to sit in a kitchen light at night and listen to small talk that was not small at all. He learned that a bear with uneven ears can steady a hand on a bad day, and that there are sentences one should say softly and then leave the room so that their echo has room to work. And he learned, late, that a man may be powerful and still need permission to take up less space. Resistance did not end. It changed shape. It wrote memos. It adjusted budgets. It tutted in corners. But the room with the soft floor endured because there were, suddenly, too many people willing to stand in its doorway on their way to other things and say, when asked why they did not move, because I have a child or because I have been one. The cafe adjusted its prices down for small cups of warm milk because there are economies beyond profit. The security guard at the night desk, Mr. Alvarez, whose knees announced the weather, learned to hold packages for 10 extra minutes so that children would not interrupt their drawings to sign for deliveries. The elevator with the scratch that looked like a river learned to stop more slowly at the Jonah floor so that children would not spill their paper clips. Maeve stitched another bear for a child whose mother slept during the day. She stitched slowly and badly and well, each visible seam a refusal to make grief look smooth. There came a day when Thomas asked if the project might bear Jonah's name, and Maeve said yes, provided there would be no banners and no slogans, provided the boy's name would be spoken only when it helped another child, not when it helped the company. Thomas promised. He had by then become careful with promises. The plaque did not shine. It warmed to the hand. People touched it without meaning to, the way the faithful will touch stone in old places. Winter laid a hand on the city. The sun went down before people were ready. The Jonah room glowed, a small, sincere light. In the evenings, Maeve would switch off lamps one by one and leave the last lit just long enough for Grace to carry her bear to the door without rushing. "A lamp," Maeve said once, "does not defeat the dark. It tells you where the chair is so you do not strike your shin." Grace nodded as if the statement explained everything. Stories like to end in the thundering of hooves or the ring of coins. This one ends, this part of it at least, with the soft, unpretending noises of ordinary mercy. Chairs moved a little to make room for small knees. A mug set down without hurry. A mop leaned in a corner because a woman who was once a cleaner needed 2 hands to tie a ribbon for a child. If you wanted to be technical and quantify, you could measure attendance, or the number of emails that arrived with fewer words in all caps, or the volume of raised voices on certain floors before and after the room opened. But the better measure was a quiet that found its way into places that had not known quiet in years. There is more to tell. About the boy whose drawing changed how a division head spoke to his team. About the woman in legal who brought poems in her briefcase and left them by the coffee machine like contraband. About the afternoon when Grace stood in front of a visiting group and explained, in a tone as calm as weather, why a bear with mismatched ears is sometimes the only form of symmetry a child can bear. For now, it is enough to leave Maeve in the doorway of that room, a hand on the light switch, waiting long enough for a child to find her shoes. For those of us who've already learned the weight of winter and the mercy of spring, not every wound requires a cure. Many ask only a companion. Sit beside before you lift. Listen longer than you speak. Keep a small light ready for the hour someone else needs it more than you do. If this story warmed a corner of your evening, I'd be honored if you left a thought or memory of your own. And if you'd like more gentle, human-centered tales, please consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one.